You know, if there's one thing I've learned from watching anime, is that anime is all about conveying extremes, showing the lengths people will go to and how much characters can grow. Anime is all about showing the strongest of the strong, the coolest of the cool, the funniest of the funny, the most epic of the epic, the grandest of the grand, the saddest of the sad, the classiest of the classy, the cutest of the cute, the sexiest of the sexy, the most badass of the most badass. Anime is all about showing the best of the best, but at the same time, anime also shows the worst of the absolute worst. Oh yes. While anime has given birth to many different heroes that people look up to and hold dear to their hearts, it has also given birth to just as many villains. Because of the nature of the medium, anime villains are some of the most powerful, badass, complex, sadistic, and downright evil villains in any form of media. Anime villains will make those who cross them suffer and show no mercy towards their enemy, whether they be power-hungry tyrants, beings of godlike power, sociopaths with their own sixth sense of justice, or just plain evil scumbags. Anime villains are some of the most memorable and straight-up malevolent characters in any form of fiction, and I can't help but love them. So seeing how I love these bearers of pain and misery so much, it only seems fitting that I discuss which of them are my 10 favourites. I mean, hey, if I can talk about my 10 favourite Nintendo villains, there should be no reason in hell I can't talk about my 10 favourite anime villains. So join me as I count down my top 10 favourite anime villains. Truth be told, I was so tempted to do a top 15 or even 20 list, but because there's a lot to discuss with each of these characters, having more than 10 entries would make this list longer than necessary, even for my type of videos, and we'd be here for well over an hour. And I've already got one video that holds that trophy. I certainly don't need another one at this point. Now before we begin, there are a few things I must clarify before we get started. First of all, I'm looking at straight up, pure 100% villains here, not anti-heroes or anything like that. Now granted, many anime characters walk a very thin line between being a villain or an anti-hero, so let me give you an example of some of the characters that won't be on this list, since I consider them to be anti-heroes rather than villains. Characters like Vegeta from Dragon Ball Z, Lelouch from Code Geass, Scar from Fullmetal Alchemist, Char Aznable from the Gundam series, Alucard from Hellsing, and Mikoto from K-Project won't be on here, since to me, these characters are anti-heroes, not villains. Secondly, is that I'm only looking at villains that have appeared in anime series rather than anime movies, so no villains from Studio Ghibli films or characters like Tetsuo from Akira will be on here as well. Thirdly, is that because I haven't watched every anime out there, I'm only including villains from animes I've seen. So sadly, because I haven't seen Bleach or Naruto, and I've only seen a very small number of episodes of One Piece, and by small I mean small by One Piece standards, so you know, none of the villains from those series are going to be on here. Also on that note, I'm only including one villain per series, since many anime have multiple villains in them, but I felt it was better to add more variety to this list rather than having, say, 3 villains from the same series show up on here. Also, I'll try to be as spoiler free as possible, but I can't guarantee that the animes connected to each villain I will be discussing will be completely spoiler free, so fair warning just in case any anime you really want to see shows up on here. And with all that cleared up, be sure to say your farewells to your loved ones and pray to whichever god you believe in, because when it comes to anime villains, your death is guaranteed, and believe me, they will make sure that you stay dead. Like I said in the beginning, many anime have multiple villains present throughout the series, though at the end of it all is the mastermind or true villain if you will. Often these characters are the ones who don't actually get in on the action much, but just the mention of their name is enough to strike fear into the hearts of anyone, and they tend to be the ones who instigate the challenges the hero must face, as well as being the final obstacle for them to overcome. Trigon is a great example of this, as Vash must defeat the Gung-Ho Guns, each of which are skilled assassins and killers, and at the end of it all, he must face the one behind all of his misery and suffering, the one and only Knives. Talk about starting off with a bang. Despite not being in the show as much as he should, Knives is a classic anime villain, and his appearance in the show completely changed the tone of Trigun and made the series take a much darker and grim tone compared to how the series started out. Now, truth be told, it was hard to choose between Knives and Legato Blue Summers, since they're both great anime villains, but I ultimately went with Knives since he's the more complex character, as well as being the mastermind of the entire scheme. Also, I always thought Legato looked kind of out of place in Trigun. Seriously, he looks like the type of villain you see in a JRPG, not a sci-fi western. Anyway, Knives is the main antagonist of Trigun and the brother of Vash the Stampede. Now, funny enough, Knives, despite being easily one of the most cruel, sadistic and downright evil villains in pretty much any anime, he actually started out very similar to Vash in terms of being a kind-hearted and curious youth, but became the way he is because of how he was abused by those who feared and resented him because he was different, so he could actually be considered sympathetic to an extent. I mean, at first, both he and Vash were nice boys and curious about the world around them, and they got along with most of the people around them just fine. However, certain individuals didn't feel the same way and saw fit to make these boys' lives miserable. And while Vash still held true to himself and kept on smiling, Knives wasn't nearly as forgiving. Eventually, it got to the point where Knives had enough and he went about killing off each of the crew members by manipulating them into fearing one another, and he even planned to crash the ship carrying millions of humans into the planet, killing them all. As time went on and both Vash and Knives wandered the wasteland to planet Gunsmoke, Knives discovered more about his latent abilities and he made it his goal to wipe out all the humans on the planet, and he kept on offering Vash the chance to join him on his mission, even after getting shot in the leg and nearly killing him with his angel arm. This shows that despite his nature, Knives still cares for his brother and wants them to be together again like when they were kids. However, this doesn't stop Knives from making Vash's life miserable and forms the Gun-Ho Guns in the hopes of causing Vash pain and misery, and in the worst case scenario, eliminating him permanently. It's actually rather interesting to see Knives turn from the kind-hearted young boy that he was to the ruthless murderer that he became, since both Vash and Knives were the new hopes for humanity, and if things went along smoothly, both of the boys would still be together along with everyone else. However, the amount of abuse and otherwise racism Knives experienced pushed him over the edge and turned him into the sadistic bastard that he is, which kinda does make you feel sorry for him. But at the same time, it's rather difficult not to hate this guy for the shit he put Vash through. Knives is also extremely powerful, since like Vash, he has abilities no other human can comprehend, and what's worse, he has a better understanding and control over these powers, making him possibly the strongest person in the Trigun universe. I mean, some of his powers are rather vague, since there have been times that he has shown to have things like telekinesis, but only briefly. But what's certain about Knives is that like Vash, he's an excellent shot and he has the power to use the angel arms. And because he's the villain, of course, his one is going to shoot a black hole. The only thing that's kind of a shame is that we don't see Knives very often, but rather he's constantly hinted at throughout the series, which is rather sad, but when he does show up, he completely steals the show, and the entire mood and atmosphere just changed completely. Much like the show, Knives is a classic anime villain and definitely stands tall among other anime villains. Sure, he's not in the series that much, and he's not as nearly as sympathetic as other anime villains, but that still doesn't change the fact that he is a great villain and has earned his place at the number 10 spot of my favorite anime villains. You know, sometimes you find characters that are just so out of place in the stories they're in, since often they don't fit the overall mood and tone of the series, which can often be rather jarring and confusing if done poorly. However, sometimes this can lead to some very powerful juxtaposition, as well as sometimes a catalyst for certain story events to take place or unfold. In this case, there was a villain who was such an evil and despicable scumbag that you just loved to hate him every second he was on screen, and the funniest part was that he was from a series that was more focused on comedy, romance, high school, and mecha action. I am of course referring to Full Metal Panic, and as such, number 9 on this list goes to the main antagonist of the series, fucking Gauron. Holy shit, talk about a severe case of mood whiplash. I mean, Full Metal Panic is known for being one of the funniest animes ever, thanks to its very tongue-in-cheek humour and rather light-hearted tone, and yet the main villain of the series is such an evil, sadistic, manipulative, repulsive scumbag. You'd swear he belongs to a series like Darker Than Black or Ghost in the Shell, and yet surprisingly here he is in one of the silliest animes I've ever seen. And oh man, do I just love to hate this guy. Seriously, Gauron from Full Metal Panic is the textbook definition of a scumbag villain. I mean, this guy just loves to cause misery to others, constantly mocks and verbally tortures Sosuke, is a constant threat throughout the series, and just loves every second of being evil. Gauron is a terrorist or mercenary who will do any job for the right amount of money, and he has absolutely no moral code or sense of justice. Gauron is a sadistic fuck in every sense of the word. I mean, when it comes to being a violent sociopath devoid of compassion, Gauron takes the fucking gold medal with a slice of cake on the side. I mean, this guy will shoot anyone in his way, kick a man when he's down, punch you in the dick and spit in your face just for good measure. Like I said, he's a pure and utter scumbag. Now, Gauron appears many times during Full Metal Panic, pretty much every episode that isn't focused on high school comedy. And every time he does, shit gets real from the moment he's on screen. I mean, right from the first episode he was featured in, Gauron just had this presence to him that was such a stark contrast to the series as a whole that it made this guy seem just so much more evil and life-threatening. I mean, no matter what the situation or circumstances, Gauron always finds a way to cause pain and suffering to those around him, and even if he loses, he'll make sure that the victors don't come out scot-free. What makes Gauron such an effective villain is just how devious and manipulative he is. I mean, Gauron is a very clever person and is able to plan everything way ahead of time, often resulting in him having a huge advantage against his enemies and even still able to turn the tide of battle in his favour at just about every turn. Not to mention, Gauron goes out of his way to mock and outright bully those who dare go against him. This is especially evident with his relationship with Sosuke, since Gauron actively fucks with Sosuke in order to completely throw him off the edge and tries to break his morale at any point. Even when he's injured to the point in which he can barely move, he'll still find a way to completely break your spirit. Whenever you see Gauron, you can tell that he's having the time of his life, causing misery to others, and by God, you just can't help but love him for being such an evil scumbag, but also hate him for being such an evil scumbag. Gauron is also a formidable fighter since he knows his way around a fight, is an expert marksman and pilots the Venom unit very well. Not to mention, he's one of the few who can use the Lambda driver, making him a huge threat against anyone even the slightest bit weaker than him. It's amazing how one character can completely change the entire tone of the series by just being on screen. I mean, it's thanks to Gauron that Full Metal Panic went from a funny high school comedy to shit you'd see in stuff like Psycho-Pass and Gundam for that matter. But truth be told, that's what makes him such a great villain. Just the fact that his mere presence can completely change the series into something much darker and more serious shows signs of a purely evil villain, and while Gauron is certainly that, ruthless, sadistic, deadly, conniving and downright evil in every sense of the word, Gauron is one villain who will make you remember his name and beg for mercy, and then swiftly proceed to shoot you in the face and shit all over you. And the worst part about this? I'm not even exaggerating. One of the main reasons the Fate series is loved by so many people is because of the premise of the show. I mean, the idea of having 7 servants from myth and legend fighting in a war that will grant the winner a single wish? That's the coolest idea ever! I mean, how can you not want to see an anime with a premise like that? And it's thanks to this premise that the Fate series is home to some very interesting characters based on historical figures like King Arthur, Alexander the Great, Lancelot, Hercules, and so on. Despite the servants being based on heroes of legend, I'd be hard pressed to call some of these servants heroes, since they're either in the moral grey area between being good and evil, and some of them are just straight up evil. Often these characters are villains of the Fate series, and when it comes to being a villain, no other servant matches the awe and majesty of the King of Heroes, Gilgamesh. How ironic, the King of Heroes turns out to be one of the major villains in the Fate series. It's funny how the world works, isn't it? Now when it came to choosing a villain from the Fate series, it was a toss-up between Gilgamesh and Caster from Fate Stay Night, since Caster is arguably the more complex and well-developed character, and is more of a looming threat compared to Gilgamesh, who kinda just has a knack for showing up like he owns the fucking place. But ultimately I went with the King of Heroes as he left much more of an impact on me, and whenever he was on screen, he stole the fucking show like no one else. Now I'd like to point out that Gilgamesh isn't my favourite servant from the Fate series. That would be Berserker from Fate Zero. But when it comes to being a villain, he certainly stands above the rest in my books, almost as if he was the king of villains. That was terrible. Now Gilgamesh has made 3, though technically it's 4, anime appearances. The first time was in the original Fate Stay Night, where he pretty much just showed up last minute and really did nothing but purpose to torment both Saber and Shiro. In Unlimited Blade Works, he's certainly a much more active character and a much bigger threat, but he still has a knack for just kind of standing around and chewing the scenery. His appearance in Fate Zero, however, was where I felt he was at his best and why he's on this list. This is mainly because not only is Gilgamesh a more active character and actually feels like a constant threat throughout the series, but he's also much more cunning and manipulative in this series, as well as being just a much more interesting character. Despite being the King of Heroes, Gilgamesh is what you would call completely self-absorbed. I mean, this guy thinks himself to be a god and sees everything, and I mean everything, to be lower than him. In fact, he feels that because of his godlike standing, everything in the world belongs to him, and pretty much sees himself as the center of the universe, never wanting to listen to others' ideologies, and can pretty much be summed up as someone who, honest to God, doesn't give 2 fucks about anyone or anything else. Gilgamesh is incredibly arrogant and refuses to acknowledge pretty much anyone. Even other heroes like Saber and Ryder, he won't give them any time of day since to him they're nothing but mongrels, and he doesn't even listen to his master who summoned him unless he uses a command seal. Man, this guy's even worse than Ash's Charizard. Because of his state of mind, Gilgamesh is a very calm, laid back, and certainly egotistical villain. He rarely gets mad or loses his cool, and often he'll act more as an observer rather than someone who takes immediate action. Gilgamesh can also be rather manipulative, since in Fate Zero, he's able to manipulate Kirei into betraying his current master and becoming Gilgamesh's new master, as well as other characters like Shinji. All of that's well and good, but the one thing everyone can agree on about Gilgamesh, and the reason he's the best villain in the series, is the fact that Gilgamesh is stupidly overpowered. I don't mean overpowered but still manageable, no, I'm talking Meta Knight fused with Mega Rayquaza, Sentinel, Objob, Tatsuya, Alucard, Broly, Superman, Fierce Deity, fucking Kirito overpowered. Now in the Fate series, every servant has a Noble Phantasm, which can pretty much be summed up as their ultimate attack. Now this can range from a certain weapon to having specific abilities or one attack that can pretty much one-shot anyone, and each Noble Phantasm has the potential to win a fight, but can still be blocked or avoided if the servant is good enough. Gilgamesh's Noble Phantasm is the Gate of Babylon, which allows him to summon every single weapon in history and shoot them like he's wielding a fucking Gatling gun. Not helping this is that each weapon he fires has the potential to kill a servant, and his trump cards are the Chains of Heaven, which can trap his opponent and make it impossible for them to move, and his ultimate weapon, the Sword Durandal, which has the strength to destroy an entire fucking dimension. Okay, this guy needs to be nerfed because holy shit is he overpowered. I mean, pretty much every servant that goes up against this guy either ends up dead or completely broken on the inside because of his sheer power. And this is why Berserker is my favourite servant, because he's one of the few who can actually stand up to this guy. When all is said and done, Gilgamesh, despite being a colossal dick, is a really great villain and definitely the best villain the Fate series has to offer. He may not be what you would call a hero, but he certainly knows what it takes to be a great villain. Being cunning, cold, calm, and the most overpowered character in fiction, Gilgamesh is one servant who certainly gets the job done, but don't expect him to do any favours, otherwise you'll be impaled from every single angle and he'll make sure of it. Some villains, despite being the antagonists of the story, are characters you can sometimes sympathise with, or you just can't bring yourself to completely hate them. But then there are villains who you hate with a burning passion and you want to see them die a slow and painful death. Now while you may hate these characters, as villains go, they get the job done and then some, so even if you don't like them, you can't deny that they are good villains. As is the case with number 7 on this list, since this character is such an evil bitch that you want to see her suffer and die in the most horrible way possible for all the misery she's caused, and even the kindest of people would have a hard time finding anything to like about her. But hey, when it comes to being an evil villain, she knows exactly what she's doing, and as such, number 7 on this list goes to the Snake Witch herself, Medusa from Soul Eater. Man, talk about a completely evil bitch. I mean, I thought Sonya from Fire Emblem Blazing Sword was one of the most evil characters I've ever seen, but I don't know, Medusa could probably give Sonya a run for her money. I mean, Sonya at least let Nino hold her hand once. Now, like with Gauron, whenever Medusa appears in Soul Eater, the entire mood of the show just changed, and suddenly everything became so much more sinister and twisted. I mean, overall, Soul Eater is a rather light-hearted show despite having some darker moments throughout the series, but Medusa just made the show so much more twisted and surreal. Like I mentioned before, Medusa is such an evil bitch that you will come to hate her within seconds. I mean, there's the obvious things like being cruel, sadistic, manipulative, conniving, sinister, and so on. She also has a knack for making the situation the worst case scenario for our main characters, and my god, what she does to Corona is just... I can't even begin to describe it. Oh yeah, she's that bad. Now, if it wasn't obvious at this point, Medusa is a snake witch and a very powerful one at that. She is considered by many to be the main antagonist of the series, despite the appearance of other villains later down the road. This is because out of all the villains, she's easily the most evil, as well as being strong enough to cause even some of the strongest characters like Stein and Spirit some serious trouble. Her goal throughout the series is to resurrect the god Ashura in order to change the current state of the world, which she despises, and she'll go to any lengths necessary to do it, and I mean any lengths necessary. What makes Medusa such an effective villain is just how manipulative she can be. Throughout the series, Medusa is constantly manipulating various characters to either do her bidding or have them turn against their friends for her benefit. To her, everything is nothing more than a tool or experiment, and it doesn't matter who it is, she'll find a way to infect you with her poison and slowly destroy you from the inside. Just like a snake, she stalks her prey slowly and lets the venom drain them until she's ready to strike. Medusa is also a very potent fighter, since her magic skills are not to be taken lightly, and often the heroes have to go all out simply to keep up with her, let alone take her down. Medusa is also very clever, since she always knows exactly what to do in order to pretty much guarantee success, and even if things take a turn for the worst, she still has a backup plan and gets right back on her feet, so no matter how hard you try, Medusa always wins in the end. But the thing that makes Medusa such an evil and downright horrible villain is how she treats her child Corona. I mean, holy shit, I don't think I've seen a more foul and black-hearted mother than Medusa. I mean, the shit she put Corona through is just disgusting, and because of her, Corona's life was nothing but pain and misery, and even when Corona befriended Maka and the rest of the gang, the memories of what Medusa did still linger in Corona's mind, and her influence causes Corona to do things he or she, truth be told I'm not too sure at this point, would never do. I mean, from a young age, Medusa subjected Corona to various different experiments, infused him with black blood and Ragnarok, tortured him when the experiment failed, and often locked him in a dark room with no food or water for days on end. I mean, Jesus Christ, woman, how evil are you? All that I've mentioned is enough to hate Medusa with a burning passion, believe me, but the thing is, that's the point of a villain. You're supposed to hate them and despise them in order to root for the heroes and be all the more glad once they get taken down. Of course, there are exceptions to this rule, but for the most part, you're meant to hate the villain, and in that sense, Medusa's a great villain. I mean, yeah, she's a monster in every sense of the word, but my god, does she embody what it means to be truly evil, and the more you see of her, the more and more you grow to hate her, and above all else, remember her for being such a great villain. And as such, Medusa takes the number 7 spot of my top 10 favourite anime villains. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm off to go call Children's Aid, because I think Medusa's going to need quite a few counselling sessions before she's able to look after a child again. Throughout this countdown, we've looked at a good number of villains, each of which have their own unique motivations and sixth sense of morals. But you have to ask yourself, what makes these people so evil? Why do they do these things? What do they get out of it? What is the end they expect to achieve by being like this? These types of questions are asked frequently when trying to understand human mentality, as well as psychopathic tendencies, and this subject matter has been tackled in many forms of fiction, including anime. But one of the best animes to tackle this subject was the 2012 anime series known as Psycho-Pass. This was a series that dealt with the human condition, as well as how people's mental state determines their place in society and what they can achieve in life, and most of the episodes revolved around a different individual and how their state of being is dealt with in this world, so for a while, Psycho-Pass had no major villain. Sort of, since this guy was in the background for the majority of the episodes and was the one calling the shots this entire time. But when he made his first true appearance in all his glory, what he did outclassed every other major villain's first appearance, and he left such an impact on you that you can't help but be completely awestruck and dumbfounded at what he did. I am of course referring to none other than Makima. This guy. I mean, holy crap, this guy. I don't think any other villain has impressed me in such a short amount of time than Makima has. I mean, yeah, we've got 5 other villains on this list that are better than him, but when it comes to making a grand entrance, no one even comes close to what Makima did. And even after all this, Makima continues to impress me at every turn, and resulted in being one of the slickest, cold-hearted, unique and complex anime villains I've ever seen. Makima is the main villain in Psycho-Pass, and he is the mastermind behind the events that take place throughout the series. In the beginning he doesn't seem like much, since like Knives he was the one pulling the strings from the shadows and spearheading every operation, so he's more hinted at in order to build up his reveal. At first, the anime portrays Makima to be a very charismatic and well-spoken person, someone who is able to get people to do whatever he wants and is an expert at bending others to his will, and seeming completely asymptomatic. In fact, at face value, he seems like a rather nice person. Well, looks can certainly be deceiving, since Makima is completely cold-hearted, cruel, savage, malevolent and completely sadistic, and nowhere was this more evident than when he made his first proper appearance. Oh man, that reveal was something I never saw coming, and it was what put him on the pedestal as being one of my favourite anime villains. Now when Makima first appears properly, he has Akane's friend Yuki at hostage and plans to kill her. When Akane scans his hue, it comes up as under 50, and as the situation gets more intense, his hue only gets lower and lower, until the point it reaches 0 and he slits Yuki's throat. This scene was just incredible and showed just how awesome of a villain Makima is. I mean, according to the system, Makima is the most psychologically stable and least threatening person that could ever exist, and yet right in front of Akane's face, he provoked and tormented her right before slitting her friend's throat. And according to the system, he was perfectly safe the entire time. This made Makima seem just so terrifying, since he's able to murder and create destruction and chaos without any remorse, regret, or unstable frame of mind. Even after this event, Makima continues to become an even more impressive villain, and his motivations are actually somewhat understandable. I wouldn't go so far as to say that he's a sympathetic villain, but his ultimate goal could potentially paint him to be a hero from a certain point of view, since his goal is to destroy the Sibley system, since he feels that it has turned society into mindless drones, whose life is determined by a few lines of code, rather than people being actual thinking individuals. So to some extent, I can understand where this guy is coming from. What goes on in the heads of evildoers will be a subject matter that many people discuss, and many forms of fiction will tackle this issue for years to come. However, I feel Psycho-Pass is one of the best stories to ever tackle this issue, and Makima is a perfect villain for the series, having all the mental traits of a psychopath, while at the same time seeming perfectly safe and acceptable by the rules of this world, and even having the motivation you can get behind. Makima is one villain you do not get on the wrong side of, because even if he tortures you, holds you against your will, inflicts both physical and mental abuse, or even murders you, according to the Sibley system, whatever he does is perfectly fine. Now there are many different views on what is considered evil or morally wrong, but very often in religious contexts, most people consider evil doing to be a sin. And with that obvious giveaway, yes, the next villain on this list is from Fullmetal Alchemist. Now for those who haven't seen Fullmetal Alchemist, first off, why? No, seriously, why? It's one of the best stories ever told. And secondly is that the main villains of the series are the homunculus that are the physical manifestations of the 7 deadly sins. Now granted, in both Alchemist and Brotherhood, though some of the homunculus like greed and envy are the same, ones like sloth and wrath are completely different, but they're still major villains in the series. Now when it comes to the best villain in the series, most people would go for either envy, wrath or greed, and I can certainly understand why since they're all great villains and great characters. But for me, the best of the 7 deadly sins has to be lust, but not the Brotherhood version of lust. I'm talking the original Fullmetal Alchemist lust. You know, it's rather strange. Though I like Alchemist and Brotherhood the same, I'll admit that Brotherhood did an overall better job at developing the homunculus and giving them more personality and backstory, especially in the case of characters like Greed. However, Lust was strangely one of the few homunculus that actually got less screen time in Brotherhood, and really the only thing that stood out about her in that series was her incredible death scene. In the original, however, Lust was a much more interesting character, and one hell of a great villain, being complex, dangerous, manipulative, and actually rather sympathetic. Now as the name implies, lust is the physical embodiment of lustful desires. As such, lust is seductive, cunning, easy to control and manipulate others, and very, very attractive. Hey man, those boobs don't lie. Lust also wields the power of the ultimate spear, which allows her fingers to turn into claws and pierce literally anything, making it so that you can only avoid her attacks and stand no chance of stopping or halting her, so pray to God that you're fast on your feet, or else you're going to get one hell of a prostate exam. Now like I said, Lust in the original series was a much more interesting and well developed character. In the beginning, Lust is very much the one calling the shots among the homunculus, being the tactician of the group and always being one step ahead of the Elric brothers, Scar and Colonel Mustang. Throughout this series, she uses her talents to manipulate alchemists into creating Philosopher's Stones, and is often the root of most conflicts and disasters in places like Lior, Xenotime, and the incident involving the fossil disease. As the series progresses, however, Lust begins to change and she begins to remember her life as a human. Yes, in the original, the homunculus were the result of trying to revive a dead human by human transmutation, and in the end, the revived humans became the homunculus, which I always thought was much more interesting than what Brotherhood did. But regardless, Lust begins to remember that she was once the wife of Scar's brother, and towards the end of the series, she even ditches her evil ways in order to help the Elric brothers find out who the root of all the evil has been throughout the entire story. This turn actually added a lot of character to Lust because throughout the series there were hints at Lust being nicer than she let on, and her finally deciding to turn over a new leaf actually felt very natural, and it made her stand out more as an individual rather than just one of the homunculus. It's because of this change that Lust came across as a much more sympathetic villain and could even be considered an anti-hero in some cases, and overall I found Lust to be the most enjoyable, interesting, threatening, fascinating, and overall best villain in the entire Fullmetal Alchemist series, even if what she does in the original series isn't canon. I mean, yeah, she may not be as evil as Envy, or as badass as Wrath, or hell, as well as developed as Greed to an extent, but when you look at the character as a whole, Lust from the original Fullmetal Alchemist is the best villain in the entire series, and thus lands at the number 5 spot of my favourite anime villains. Still, you've got to feel sorry for Gene Havoc. He never did get to touch Lust's glorious breasts. Fucking cockblocker Colonel Mustang. They say that absolute power corrupts all, that if enough power is given to even the nicest of people, or those whose hearts are pure and gold, they will be consumed by their own power and turn to the dark side. Now this concept isn't anything new to any forms of fiction, and a lot of characters who fall victim to this are often rulers, overlords, kings, or those in some form of high standing. But what many people seem to forget is that this can happen to just about anyone. They don't have to be in high standing to begin with. In fact, they can be nothing more than a simple high school student who live their everyday lives as anyone else would, until one day they stumble across an object of immense power that gives them the power to control the fate of the world and thus become a god. If you haven't guessed by now, number 4 on this list is Light Yagami from Death Note. Light Yagami is one of the stranger choices for this list. Not because he's a bad villain or anything, no, in fact Light is a great villain and a fantastically written character, but many people question whether or not Light really is a villain. Similar to Lelouch from Code Geass, many people argue whether or not Light is truly a villain or more of an anti-hero. Personally, I consider Light to be a villain, but it's very easy to understand why people would make this argument, and in all honesty, Light's actions are somewhat justified to a certain extent. Now, I'm not going to go off on some sort of moral tangent and talk about what's morally right or wrong, because I don't want to open a shitstorm in the comment sections, but throughout the story of Death Note, there are times where I would agree with what Light is doing, or completely understand his actions, but only sometimes. In order for those who haven't seen the series to get a better understanding, in the beginning of Death Note, Light is a simple high school student. He is incredibly clever and pretty much a child prodigy in some regard, as well as being rather popular at school, though he himself finds life dull and boring, as he goes through all the motions of living but feels empty inside. That is until one day he picks up a strange book just lying on the ground known as a Death Note, which says that if you write someone's name in the book while having their face in your mind at the time, they will die. Light thinks the entire thing is a pile of bogus, but keeps hold of the book regardless. Later, he sees a news report about a crime taking place on TV, and in order to make sure that the book is a pile of crap, he decides to write the criminal's name in the book. But much to Light's shock and horror, it works and the criminal dies. Afterwards, Light meets the owner of the Death Note, the Shinigami, that's God of Death for those who don't know, named Ryuk, who explains the true purpose of the Death Note and all the rules that come with it. With the Death Note in hand, Light decides he will punish those who have hurt the innocent and live a life of crime and evil, and with this he shall become the god of the new world. Throughout the series, Light makes it his goal to shape the world in the way he sees fit by the alias of Kira, and he must do this without anyone learning who he really is, and as the series progresses, Light's goals and sense of morals constantly battle with one another as to whether he's really doing the right thing or if he's just fulfilling his own selfish desires. Light himself is a very well written and complex character. He's clever, sharp, talented, and can seamlessly go from a kind-hearted, charming and likeable boyfriend and son to a cynical, rage-induced, bloodthirsty maniac with an extreme god complex. This may seem like Light's a very all-over-the-place character, but that's not the case at all, since the way he changes personalities and acts differently depending on the situation and people he's dealing with feels incredibly natural and shows that Light is the type of person who knows exactly what to do and what to say at the exact right time. This is what makes Light such a great and complex character. Because his actions are in a constant state of moral grey for the most part, it's very difficult to determine whether or not what he's doing is truly right or wrong. Light isn't just some one-track mind person or doing this entire thing just for fun. Light seems genuinely convinced that what he's doing is what is best for the world, and while not everything he does is morally correct, it's hard to argue that some of his actions aren't done with good intentions. Personally, the reason I consider Light a villain is that though at the beginning of the series I was totally behind Light's actions and completely agreed with his ultimate goals to punish criminals, as the series goes on, Light becomes more obsessed with trying to stay ambiguous and not get caught out by the police. As a result, Light will often kill those who get too close to him or even manipulate people who love and trust him for his own ends. This is why I consider Light to be a villain rather than an anti-hero, and why I said absolute power corrupts all, since he started out with the intention to punish those who were evil, but in the end, he succumbed to evil and killed those he wanted to rather than changing the world for the better, at least from my point of view. I could go on and on about Light's character and how his actions are either morally correct or incorrect, but if we did that, we'd be here forever. So I'll end by saying this: whether or not Light is truly evil or not is for you to decide. What you can't disagree with though, is that Light Yagami is a fantastically written and complex character. His actions, motivations, personality and goals are all subjects that could be discussed for hours on end, and as such, Light Yagami takes the 4th place spot of my favourite anime villains. And if Light is watching this video, I bet he's fuming at the fact that he's not number 1. Well, good luck trying to kill me, since CRASHX500 isn't my real name, and obviously you'll never find out in a million years what my Sometimes, being a memorable and well-loved character isn't about how much screen time or development you get, it's how you use the time you're given to make an impact on the viewer, and sometimes it's more effective this way. There are many characters who don't appear much within the story or get too much development, but they leave just as much of an impact on you regardless because you remember them for what they do and how amazingly they do it. I mean, think about it. Everyone remembers Broly despite not doing much. Everyone loves Mewtwo despite only being the final boss unless you count the anime. And good god, look at Ridley from Metroid. Outside of the manga, he only acts as a recurring boss in most Metroid games, and everyone, including myself, loves him. In this case, there's one anime villain who, despite having a very small amount of screen time, left one hell of an impact on people who watch this series, and this guy is often regarded as one of the best anime villains of all time. That's quite the statement for a character that isn't even in the series that much. But the best way I could sum this guy up is that he is rather, how should I put this, vicious. Oh yes, any anime fan out there will tell you that Vicious from Cowboy Bebop is one of the best anime villains of all time, and I can certainly agree to that. I mean, this guy is only in 5 out of the 26 episodes of Bebop, and even then he's not even on screen that much. But even still, everyone remembers him for just how incredible of a villain he is, and just how much of an impact this guy leaves on people. Vicious is the main villain of Cowboy Bebop, and is one of the few recurring characters outside of Jet, Spike, Faye, Ed, and Ein. Vicious is a member of the Red Dragon crime syndicate, and is heavily tied to Spike's backstory, as Spike used to be part of the syndicate as well. While he doesn't appear much in this series, whenever he does, he poses a huge threat to Spike and the crew of the Bebop, as well as the story centered around him being some of the best, if not the best episodes of Cowboy Bebop. Vicious is the type of villain who commands fear and respect. Every time he enters the scene, the atmosphere completely changes and he steals the spotlight without even trying. This guy is cold, ruthless, dry, bloodthirsty, callous, ambitious, and terrifying. Every time he opens his mouth, the words that come out are like the words of the devil himself, and they send a cold shiver down your spine every time you hear them. Not to mention, he even looks like some sort of ghost or living demon, with those eyes that pierce your soul and that sadistic grin of his. I mean, he doesn't even look like he belongs in Cowboy Bebop. He looks more like something out of Final Fantasy with his katana and grey hair. Connection? Speaking of katana, Vicious is also a deadly fighter and one of the most dangerous characters in Cowboy Bebop. He's quick, precise, lethal, cunning, always one step ahead, and is completely merciless. It doesn't matter whether you've got guns or grenades, Vicious will fuck you up no matter what the situation. Also, give this guy bonus points for having a pet cormorant. Sometimes leaving an impact on people is doing the best with what little time you have, and well, Vicious knows exactly how to do that. This guy may have only appeared in 5 episodes of Bebop, but oh man, those 5 episodes will be the episodes you remember the most thanks to this sadistic, brutal, black-hearted, terrifying, and completely 100% awesome villain. And if you disagree with this, well my friend, you shall shed red tears. One of the most popular types of characters with a certain power is the cryokinetic. Cryokinetics, or as most people refer to them as ice wielders, are characters that have the power to either manipulate or create ice at will and use it as they see fit. Now the lengths in which they can do this varies from character to character, but a lot of people really like these characters and many of them have appeared in many forms of fiction, as well as being some of the most beloved characters of all time. I mean, people like Iceman from X-Men, Sub-Zero from Mortal Kombat, Rundus from Metroid Prime, Jin Katsuragi from BlazBlue, fucking Elsa from Frozen. All of these characters are characters people just love, and a lot of people argue which cryokinetic is the best. Well, you know what I say? Fuck every single one of those pussy-ass snowflakes. Esdeath is the one and true Ice Queen. Esdeath. My god, Esdeath. When it comes to cryokinetics, there is no one as awesome and powerful as Esdeath, And when it comes to anime villains, Esdeath is just incredible. I mean, I love Esdeath so much, and she's quickly become one of my favourite anime characters, let alone villains. Before you get ahead of yourself and think I'm being overly biased towards Esdeath, there have been other characters who I've just fallen in love with and have become some of my favourite characters within their respective series or medium as a whole. I mean, Sumiya from Fire Emblem Awakening is a character I fell in love with, and she quickly became one of my favourite Fire Emblem characters, and the Black Knight from Fire Emblem Path of Radiance not only became one of my favourite Fire Emblem characters, but also one of my favourite Nintendo villains and villains as a whole. Esdeath is another case of this because while watching Akame ga Kill, I just couldn't take my eyes off Esdeath, and every time she was on screen, I just loved every second of it. Now, why exactly did I love Esdeath so much, and why is she such a great villain? Well, there are many reasons for this, so allow me to explain them. First of all, then when it comes to being a cryokinetic, Esdeath has no equal that I know in terms of just being how powerful her ice attacks are. I mean, she can do all the obvious stuff like create ice out of thin air, rain down icicle spears, freeze water around her, all that jazz. But not only can she do that, but she can also summon ice meteorites, manipulate her body in order to create ice limbs, and even freeze time. Yes, you heard me, she can freeze time. I mean, holy shit, I thought Gilgamesh was OP, but I don't know. Esdeath is pretty overpowered, even for a series like Akame ga Kill, since a lot of people have pointed out that she could have easily overthrown the Empire, but chooses not to in order to continue fighting in countless wars. Speaking of war, another thing I love about Esdeath is that throughout the series we get to see so many different sides of her, making her a very well fleshed out character and just being such an entertaining character every time she's on screen. From her first appearance, you knew Esdeath was someone you do not fuck with, since she was the strongest person in the entire Empire and enjoys war, blood, violence and torturing people in every way possible. Esdeath is sadistic, cruel, twisted, cold-hearted, naturally, and just plain evil. She will find any excuse to kill and do it without thinking twice. That being said, she is very clever and a brilliant warrior and strategist, as well as being very charismatic and able to inspire her troops. Esdeath from a young age grew up with the mentality that the strong live and the weak die, and considering Esdeath's strength, it's easy to see why she has no problem killing anyone in her path. Even if they're completely innocent or have done nothing wrong, Esdeath pretty much shows no empathy towards anyone. That is until she meets our main character, Tatsumi. When Esdeath meets Tatsumi, she instantly falls in love with him and wants him all to herself, even going so far as to take him prisoner against his will. It is at this point that Esdeath goes for a rather subtle but effective change to her character, since she slowly but surely becomes more warm-hearted towards others and just an overall nicer person. I mean, at the end of the day, she's still evil, and I would never class her as an anti-hero or anything like that, oh god no. But there are moments in the series where you see a more warm side of her character. I mean, she pays respect to her fallen comrades, is more forgiving to those who fail in their missions, and even goes so far as to comfort Seiryu when Dr. Stylish dies. In fact, this one scene portrayed Esdeath to be more of a caring, motherly figure rather than a ruthless murderer. I mean, this doesn't make her sympathetic or morally ambiguous, but it's another side of Esdeath that I didn't expect to see, and it made her a more fleshed out character. Plus, it was something unique amongst most villains, who tend to have a one-track mind and personality, even some of the best ones. This is why I like Esdeath so much, and why I think she's such a great villain, since you see her in every light or situation that makes a great villain. Cold and callous, laid back and calm, bloodthirsty and ruthless, cunning and manipulative, soft and caring, badass and life-threatening, or just completely kawaii. Esdeath is just such a wonderful character and a completely amazing villain who I just love to pieces. No matter the situational mood, every time Esdeath is on screen, she just made the experience so much better. And yes, let's not ignore the fact that Esdeath is really, really hot. Hell, I'm not going to deny it, Esdeath is one fine looking woman. I mean, she's got the long slender figure, the long blue hair, the military getup, the boobs that even Lust would be jealous of. Esdeath has it where it counts. In the end, I just love Esdeath so much, and she is one character I'll never get tired of seeing, as well as being one of the best cryokinetics in fictional history, and as such, Esdeath takes the number 2 spot of my favourite anime villains, which just leaves the number 1 entry. Okay people, this is it. My favourite anime villain of all time. Truth be told, I had a really hard time deciding whether or not to switch the first and second place entries around, because I was very tempted to put Esdeath at the number 1 spot. But she's a character who I've only recently discovered, whereas this villain has been one of my favourites for years and left such an impact on me that I still get goosebumps every time this guy is on screen. And after years and years, I still find him to be the most ruthless, badass, maniacal, sadistic and all-around best anime villains ever. So without further ado, ladies, gentlemen and everyone else, join me as together we cry, All Hail Lord Frieza! Frieza. Motherfucking Frieza. Oh man, I get goosebumps every time I just say his name. Yes, like a lot of kids in the 90s, I watched anime on TV, and one of my favourite shows was Dragon Ball Z. And naturally, Frieza was one of the first anime villains I ever had the pleasure of seeing. And holy shit, did he blow me out of the fucking water. I mean, this guy was unlike any other villains I'd ever seen at the time, or ever since really. I mean, not only was Frieza the best villain in the Dragon Ball universe, but he's also responsible for the best saga in the entire Dragon Ball series. I reckon some of you might be thinking I'm being blinded by nostalgia, but honest to god that's not the case, since regardless if it's your first time seeing him or your 100th time, Frieza is a villain who just stays with you for life, and my god does he get everything right when it comes to being a villain. I'll admit that certain villains are better than Frieza when it comes to certain characteristics. For instance, both Light and Makima are much better written and more complex. Medusa and Gauron are considerably more evil and sadistic, Gilgamesh and Esdeath are more overpowered for the type of world they're a part of, and so on. While Frieza doesn't do everything the best, when it comes to being a villain, Frieza is someone who gets everything right, and he has gone down in history as one of the best anime villains of all time. For those who don't know, and I assume that's 3 of you at this point, Frieza is one of the main villains in Dragon Ball Z, and could be considered the first major villain of the series. Yeah, I know, there's Vegeta, but again, I see him as more of an anti-hero. Frieza is the ruler of the universe and is considered to be the most powerful being to ever exist. Even before the events that take place on Namek, no one dared to cross Frieza, and those who did were completely wiped out. In fact, Frieza was responsible for the death of most of the Saiyan race. During Dragon Ball Z, Frieza makes it his goal to collect the 7 Namekian Dragon Balls and use them to become immortal, and during his scavenger hunt for them, he wipes out most of the Namekian race simply because he could. If it wasn't obvious by now, Frieza is one ruthless bastard. I mean, the amount of people he's killed and tortured reach numbers I cannot even begin to count to, and the fact that he will happily and willingly commit mass genocide at the snap of a finger just shows how cruel Frieza is. It doesn't matter who it is or what they've done, Frieza will kill you, and he will make you suffer in the worst ways possible before you die. Not only that, but Frieza enjoys so much that he purposely keeps his victims alive as long as possible in order to exact the worst type of punishment possible, despite the fact he could effortlessly kill them and put them out of their misery. As you can imagine, because he's so powerful and feared by everyone, Frieza is vain, self-absorbed and completely egocentric. In fact, he loves himself so much that he feels people should be honoured to die by his hands, and even more so to see each of his forms. I mean, there were so many times in Dragon Ball Z where Frieza would toy with people like Gohan, Piccolo and Vegeta just because he could, and even the strongest attacks meant nothing to Frieza. What else can I say? It's Frieza. I love him, Dragon Ball Z fans love him, anime fans love him, hell, everyone loves him. It doesn't matter if it's because of nostalgia or you're just overwhelmed by his appearance for the first time, Frieza remains one of the greatest anime villains ever created. He's powerful, maniacal, sadistic, terrifying, brimming with snark and narcissism, and just an all-around badass. Frieza rightfully takes the #1 spot as my favourite anime villain of all time. This has been CRASHX500. I wish you all a great night, take care, and remember, while anime promotes the best aspects of people, it also shows the worst sides of people, and anime villains will always be the ones to embody these qualities. But at the end of the day, no matter how evil, despicable, and downright wicked these people are, you just can't bring yourself to hate them, and hell, you can even learn to love them. Unless it's this fuckface!